Why does France, who claims to be saving Africa, consistently show up without invitation? Is it still 1850 in their minds? France just prepared 2,000 troops to invade Niger. France is still engaging in colonial cosplay while the rest of the world is progressing. Let's be honest, their stability mission bullshit is no longer bought by anyone. Why does Africa become poorer each time they visit if it's about peace? What causes insurgency to spread wherever it goes? Above all, who granted France the authority to take on the role of Africa's irate landlord? It's understandable why this could sound irritating. But believe me, things get worse. This is not merely a Niger story. Africa's future is being reshaped by a global upheaval, and the West is freaking out. But where, if anywhere, does the desperate activity go in the West? Let's investigate. Imagine residing in a nation that supplies 20% of the uranium used in France's nuclear power reactors, but where more than 80% of people lack access to energy. It's Niger. A country that is paradoxically wealthy but impoverished as a result of decades of unfair agreements that have kept its citizens in the dark, both literally and figuratively. Under agreements mediated by French companies with the help of Nigerian elites, uranium, the lifeblood of France's nuclear energy industry, has been flowing out of Niger's brains for years. Neo-colonial exploitation was exemplified by these transactions. Niger received virtually little material benefits, while France only paid a small portion of the uranium's value. The funds hardly made it into public services, causing basic infrastructure to collapse, hospitals to be under-equipped, and schools to be underfunded. Think about the striking contrast. Paris is a symbol of riches and modernity, shining with the energy produced by Nigerian uranium. In contrast, rural Niger frequently uses kerosene lamps and firewood. Without access to electric light, children born in a nation rich in natural resources find it difficult to learn at night. More than 80% of Nigerians do not have access to power. It's not just economic injustice, it's ethical. At last, the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted. The latest coup was the result of years of exploitation and discontent rather than a one incident. It wasn't just another power grab when the military overthrew the Western-aligned government of Niger. It was a declaration and a protest against the system that had defrauded the nation for many years. Their most audacious action was to stop exporting uranium to France. Not only was Paris inconvenienced by this choice, the whole Sahel was rocked by the impact. France, which depends largely on Nigerian uranium for its energy independence, was forced to deal with the aftermath. This was about control, not just energy security. The junta wasn't finished though. They focused on the French military presence, which had been presented as counterinsurgency operations for decades. These bases were actually a representation of French power, a continual reminder of authority. The junta essentially put an end to a lengthy history of military meddling masquerading as aid by driving out French troops. The Nigerian people were moved by this act of disobedience. In celebration of what they perceived as the restoration of their country's honor, thousands of people streamed onto the streets. Chants demanding sovereignty and signs reading France out reverberated throughout the cities. To the Niger people, there was more to this than troops and uranium. Self-respect and demonstrating to the world that they would no longer be used as pawns in someone else's game were the main goals. Near May, large groups were observed heading toward a French military installation in the capital of Niger. The Western media has their own spin, of course. Headlines were dominated by reports of insurgency and instability. The story was a given. A perilous coup that endangered both security and democracy. On the ground, however, the reality was very different. With support from other nations like Mali and Burkina Faso, Niger managed to hold its position and avoid devolving into anarchy. These countries viewed Niger's uprising as their own since they had experienced similar forms of exploitation. This story was no longer limited to a single nation. It was about a whole area rebelling against a history of exploitation. Because of Niger's actions, a fuse was lit, and resistance started to spread throughout the Sahel. A regional movement for self-determination was swiftly emerging from what had begun as a single act of defiance. The stakes were obvious. This was more than military bases and uranium. It was about taking back the story, taking back the resources, and most of all, taking back the dignity. The challenge for the people of Niger was not whether they would succeed, but rather how far their opposition to exploitation might motivate others. Not only did Niger's audacious actions upset France. Throughout Africa, it sparked a surge of solidarity. Burkina Faso and Mali have been dealing with the same storyline for decades. Western countries set up military bases, exploit resources, and enter under the pretense of aid, leaving behind instability and poverty. The script is now changing. When French troops were driven out of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso swiftly expressed their support. They have joined forces to build a tri-nation alliance that is impending Western control in the Sahel. This is a cultural and economic awakening rather than merely a political alliance. Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso has been a pivotal player in this opposition. He has exposed the hypocrisy of Western help in his lectures, characterizing it as a control mechanism rather than a source of assistance. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has prioritized regional collaboration above Western military aid. Think about the current initiatives to coordinate Sahelian security. These countries are demonstrating that they can handle their own problems without the assistance of France or any other Western power by combining their resources and exchanging intelligence. The West is most afraid of this type of independence. However, politics isn't the only factor here. It has to do with pride. For millennia, African countries were informed that without Western help, they would not be able to survive. They are now demonstrating the opposite. How far will France go to restore control is the question. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Let's face it, France says it's in the Sahel to combat insurrection. This has nothing to do with insurgency. It has to do with territory. Under missions like Operation Serval and Operation Barkhane, French personnel have been stationed in the area for decades with the purported goal of stabilizing it. What do we observe today, though? Escalating anti-French sentiment, shattered societies, and rising insurgency. Why has the Sahel gotten more unstable if these efforts were so successful? In actuality, Africa was not intended to benefit from these initiatives. Their purpose was to aid France. Consider the case of Mali. Western media hailed Operation Serval as a triumph over the rebels. In actuality, however, it exacerbated national divisions as rebel organizations took advantage of the resulting power vacuum. Then came the multi-nation operation known as Operation Barkhane, which brought animosity instead of peace. Not to be overlooked is this playbook's economic component. France's uranium control over Niger is more than just a commercial arrangement. It's a lifeline. Nigerians do not benefit from the inexpensive African resources that French residents use to power their homes. Taking everything and giving nothing is the core of neo-colonialism. However, the game is evolving. France's hegemony is eroding as countries like Burkina Faso and Niger seize control of their resources. Along with it, a whole Western story of helpful intervention is coming apart. However, France is not sitting in silence. France has resorted to its most dependable tactic, military posturing, following Niger's audacious rejection of France, which included reducing uranium exports, driving out troops, and cutting off ties. According to the most recent estimates, France has 2,000 soldiers ready for a possible intervention in Niger, which it has framed as an effort to fight insurgency and restore order. However, beneath the grandiose language is a much more sinister reality, a last-ditch effort to regain control of an area that is sliding away from it. This military buildup is not a sudden development. Nigerian uranium is crucial to France's energy security, and the latest embargo has rocked Paris. France's nuclear facilities have been using inexpensive, reliable uranium from Niger for decades to power its homes, businesses, and even its aspirations to become a global leader in nuclear energy. An unimaginable situation for a country that takes pride in its energy independence. France might experience energy shortages and skyrocketing expenses in the absence of Niger. However, the Sahel has long been seen as France's zone of influence, where its military presence has both strategic and symbolic meaning. French installations in Niger and other nations have been promoted as hubs for counterinsurgency, but their existence hasn't had much of an impact on insurgency. Rather, these outposts have come to represent neo-colonial dominance, which has exacerbated anti-French feeling throughout the area. The leaders of France appear unable to grasp the fact that losing Niger would mean losing access to vital resources, as well as its whole presence in the Sahel. Now that it has 2,000 troops available, France is making it clear that it will not give up easily. In order to justify military action, potential intervention is being presented as a reaction to the increasing power of rebel organizations in the area. But let's take a time to ask the difficult questions. Why should insurgency be eliminated in Niger if France's military actions in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad haven't? Why do areas where foreign forces are stationed tend to see a rise in insurgency? Above all, who has the authority to determine that military action is the answer? The people of Niger or France? The reality is obvious. This has nothing to do with insurgency. It has to do with control. France is trying to use security concerns as a cover for its political and economic agenda. It is establishing the foundation for a military invasion that is more about retaining power than it is about promoting peace by portraying Niger as unstable and insurgent-ridden. However, there are hazards associated with France's strategy. With strong popular backing and solidarity from nearby nations like Burkina Faso and Mali, the Nigerian junta has made it clear that they would not tolerate outside meddling. Any French military engagement may lead to a regional crisis, transforming the Sahel into a battlefield between Western powers trying to maintain their waning influence and African governments battling for sovereignty. Furthermore, Africa is not the only continent with geopolitical stakes. Global actors like China and Russia, who have been expanding their influence in Africa through military alliances, commerce, and investment, are keeping a careful eye on France's moves. France's reputation in the area may be further damaged if a French involvement allowed these nations to strengthen their ties with Niger and its allies. Niger's citizens have also expressed their position clearly. Nigerians have taken to the streets to demand sovereignty and self-determination as protests against French meddling have become increasingly vocal and widespread. A strong message is conveyed by the banners, the chanting, and the unflinching commitment. Even if France sends troops, it won't win over Niger's hearts or territory. Then there is the intervention's financial cost. It costs a lot to deploy 2,000 soldiers, and France is already under pressure at home. From public discontent with its foreign policies to energy inflation. Many French residents are wondering why, in the face of unresolved domestic problems, their government still prioritizes military expeditions in Africa. It's getting more difficult to overlook the widening gap between France's domestic problems and its international aspirations. What's the endgame for France here? It won't receive the same level of compliance as it usually does, even if it is successful in initiating an intervention. No longer is the Sahel the submissive battlefield of colonial times. African countries are retaliating more forcefully than before, and any mistake on the part of France might have disastrous consequences and cement its reputation as an imperialist state out of step with contemporary times. But should we stop France? Ultimately, the only accusations made against France are that it does not support Africa. Let's contest this then. Although it is frequently assumed that there is no proof that France is clearly harming Africa, let's provide evidence to support whatever we say today. The goal of France's 2013 military action in Mali, Operation Serval, was to stop the Islamist extremists who had taken over the country's northern areas from continuing their progress. The triumph was praised by Western media as being rapid and conclusive. France claimed to have restored order after its troops retook important cities like Timbuktu and Gao. The aftermath, however, revealed a different picture. Mali became more divided as a result of the intervention rather than being more stable. As they adjusted, insurgent organizations spread into rural regions and began carrying out lethal guerrilla warfare. Operation Serval pushed insurgency underground, where it became more tenacious, rather than eliminating it. Even worse, Malians' anti-French feeling was heightened by the French forces' presence, as they came to see the intervention as a front for defending French interests rather than Mali's sovereignty. The harm was already done by 2014, when Operation Serval evolved into Operation Barkhane, a larger counterinsurgency campaign that involved 5 Sahelian countries. Mali plunged farther into anarchy, which led to a string of military takeovers that overthrew the government France had defended. The CFA franc, a currency used by 14 African countries and associated with the French treasury, is among the most glaring evidence of France's detrimental legacy in Africa. The CFA franc, which was first implemented during colonial rule and is based on the euro, gives France considerable influence over these countries' monetary policies. Critics point out that the CFA franc inhibits economic growth and independence, while supporters contend that it offers stability. The currency essentially restricts the financial sovereignty of the countries that use it by requiring them to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves with the French treasury, due to antiquated institutions that put French interests ahead of local requirements. African countries who used the CFA franc found it difficult to compete on a global scale. Modern politicians are increasingly calling for currency reform, echoing the criticism of the CFA franc as a tool of neo-colonial control. France's counterinsurgency military activities in Chad have caused more harm than benefit. Despite Idriss Déby's regime's history of corruption and violations of human rights, France has long backed the government of Chad. Chad was used as a base for regional counterinsurgency operations while France was in charge. However, the underlying reasons of insurgency, poverty, unemployment, and political disenfranchisement were not addressed by these initiatives. Rather, French backing for Déby solidified a government that put allegiance to Paris ahead of the welfare of its citizens. France supported Mohamed Idriss Déby, Déby's son, who assumed power in a contentious military takeover after his death in 2021. People in Chad protested the move, accusing France of supporting a monarchy that suppresses democracy and upholds inequity. France has exploited Africa in ways other than just its economic and military activities. It also applies to the environment. French logging firms have been charged with overexploitation of Gabon's abundant rainforests, which are an essential component of the Congo Basin and a global carbon sink. Local communities must contend with deforestation, biodiversity loss, and disturbed ecosystems, while French corporations benefit from timber exports. Gabonese population now wonder about the true cost of French involvement, as promises of sustainable practices and community benefits have mostly gone unmet. These illustrations highlight a recurrent trend. France enters African countries promising partnership, stability, and prosperity, but instead leaves a legacy of broken promises and worsening crises. France's operations have continuously put its interests ahead of African sovereignty and well-being, from military setbacks in Mali to economic exploitation in Niger and environmental damage in Gabon. The message is obvious for African countries. Foreign powers with vested interests cannot bring about true stability, prosperity, and growth. There is optimism that Africa will eventually be able to escape the cycle of exploitation and forge its own course towards self-determination as more nations, like Niger, reject French influence. Let's not mince words then. The goal of France's 2,000-man troop mobilization is not to save Niger. The goal is to save itself. The West is desperate to maintain its grasp on Africa as it watches it ebb and flow. Here's the issue though, this is not the 20th century Africa. Niger is not by himself. The Sahel is turning into a stronghold of resistance thanks to allies like Mali and Burkina Faso. And France is about to have a harsh awakening if it believes it can march in and bring order back. Niger's citizens have made their position known. They oppose French intervention and French troops. Sovereignty is what they desire. They're prepared to battle for it too, not with guns, but with solidarity and resolve. The effects of France's actions in Niger will extend well beyond its boundaries. They will encounter more than one country's resistance if they invade. They will spark a backlash across the continent. This is the reality. France is afraid. The writing on the wall is visible to them. Their colonial strategy is no longer effective. Additionally, their impact in Africa is diminishing more quickly than they can respond. However, Africa is rising, not just escaping. Countries from Zimbabwe to Niger are calling for accountability, dignity, and resource control. The West is unable to keep up with their revision of the terms of engagement. France will be fighting more than simply Niger if it goes ahead with its invasion. It will be battling the will of a whole continent fed up with being told it must be saved. Should France venture into Niger, in your opinion? Is it really necessary? How much should France pay for this foolishness? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.